If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you probably know that I don't have a very high opinion of the Alpine F1 team. It's not that they're not competitive, I don't particularly care that they're not winning races. It's more the attitude they have to Formula 1. This "we're run by the board", this "we're going to be championship contenders in 100 races" kind of thing they have going on. I just don't really think it works. Fernando Alonso and Oscar Piastri giving them the middle finger a couple of years ago was just the perfect example of this. And since then, the mass firing of the management team has just made them a bit of a joke, really. They sank to a new low when they ran to Flavio Briatore for help, a man who shouldn't be allowed anywhere near a Formula 1 race, never mind allowed in any kind of management position at a Formula 1 team, especially the one that he cheated at. Do Renault have no shame? As they've imploded over the past couple of seasons, it's just become more and more embarrassing for them, and with the recent announcements about their engine department, honestly, I'm just completely done with them. With Renault shutting down their engine department and announcing that they're going to be buying a large number of parts off Mercedes, the end of Alpine is here, and honestly, it's about time. I'm George, this is F1 Reverse, you're watching Don't At Me, the show where I get a chance to get some things off my chest. Let's get started. Before I get completely into slating the Alpine team, you need a bit of a background on where they're from and what their kind of deal is. So Alpine's a sports car brand owned by Renault. They've existed since the 1950s and have made a limited selection of models, which all kind of look exactly the same. They found some success in motor racing, though not very recently. The Le Mans entry this year was, well, embarrassingly bad, I think is probably the only way to describe it, but they did win the race once back in 1978. Recently, Renault rebooted the brand after almost 2 decades without a new model being released, and decided that a WEC team and changing the Renault team into an Alpine F1 team would be great branding pieces and an excellent way to boost sales of their A110 car. To be fair, it got people talking about the brand for the first time in 20 years, though their performances in F1 certainly wouldn't convince me to buy one of their cars. Renault's history as an F1 team has always been a little bit cagey, I think is the best way to describe it. Their first stint in the sport was from 1977 till 1985, and if René Arnoux or Alain Prost had been able to finish a race in 81 or 82, they might have had a chance of winning a championship. They sold engines to Lotus as well, who during the mid-80s looked relatively competitive, but Renault's kind of unbelievable ability to make engines with the structural integrity of a freshly baked croissant meant that retirements due to engine failures were far too common and held Lotus back. With the results of the works team declining through the early 80s, Renault decided to bin off the team in 1985, and with their engines as resolute as a French infantry line, they also decided to stop making those a year after. They then came back a few years later and had some relative success in the early 90s, before binning off the engine program again in 1997. Determined to waste as much money as physically possible through startup costs, they then once again decided they wanted to be in Formula 1 in 2002. This time, thanks to Fernando Alonso, they found some success, actually quite a lot. They won the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship titles in 2005 and 6, before declining performances forced Flavio Briatore to cheat his team to a race win via the Crashgate scandal. His race fixing resulted in a well-earned indefinite ban from Formula 1, which was ridiculously overturned a year later when the French courts decided that because the FIA president didn't particularly like Flavio Briatore, that meant that he shouldn't have been allowed to ban the man from the sport. A completely ridiculous decision, but it is what it is.
It is what it is. It is what it is.
Renault again sold their F1 team at the end of 2009, but as an engine supplier they actually had some relative success for the next few years. They eventually returned to the sport in 2016, buying the exact same team off Lotus that they'd sold to them 6 seasons earlier. It's pretty easy to see the pattern emerging. Renault and Formula 1 are like the will they won't they couple that's in every single American sitcom. They're the Ross and Rachel of Formula 1. Sometimes they're together, sometimes they're apart. When they're together, everyone's wondering when they're going to break up. When they're broken up, everyone's wondering when they're going to be back together. Alpine, at the moment, are heading towards that big end-of-season breakup that's already happened twice before. It's the same old rehashed storyline we've seen before, but to spice things up and try and boost ratings this time round, they've just brought back Flavio Briatore for a bit of a quick cameo. And just like Ross and Rachel, Renault and Flavio Briatore are F1's least liked characters. This is where my personal problems with the Renault team really start to come out. So back in 2016, when they re-entered F1, they had this real bold statement where they had a 5-year plan that was going to see them back challenging at the front of Formula 1. 3 podiums and a best finish of 4th in the Constructors' Championship was their reward for that 5-year plan, but to their credit, their final year was their best year and they had shown improvement over those 5 years. They weren't championship challengers, but they were getting better. However, considering the goal of the 5-year plan had been to challenge for championships, it was definitely a failure. In 2021, Renault rebranded as Alpine to use them as a marketing piece, and at the time CEO Laurent Rossi gave this big announcement about this exciting, dynamic new strategy they had to try and win championships again. It was the 100 race plan. Now, of course, the 100 race plan was absolutely nothing like the 5-year plan. No, this was new and different, and this was going to be the thing that got them back to the front. This wasn't Renault anymore, this was Alpine. This wasn't a company who made cheap cars for first-time drivers or for young families. This was a sports car company who knew how to make fast cars and knew how to make cars out of something other than plastic and paper mache. They even brought back the one man who found them success in the past, Fernando Alonso. Things started really well. Esteban Ocon won the 2021 Hungarian Grand Prix, though it did require F1's most ridiculous-looking grid start in its entire history. I'll never forget the iconic image of an F1 grid with only Lewis Hamilton on it, asking his team what the F was going on and why he had intermediate tyres on a completely dry track in the blazing sunshine. 11 races into the new plan, things actually really looked to be going well. They'd carried on from where they were in 2020 as a competitive-ish looking team, and, things were feeling good. However, after that shock win, everything has gone terribly. The Alpine 100 race plan was meant to include a big overhaul of facilities in England and France, as well as recruiting the best possible people to these new facilities. In reality, they chased away Fernando Alonso, they pissed off Oscar Piastri so badly that he dumped them over a tweet, and proceeded to fire their entire management team. 2024 was meant to be the year that, according to the 100 race plan, Alpine would be challenging for a title. Instead, they've gone from lucky race winners to, challenging for 10th place. The plan, with its fancy new facilities and factory hardware and the top minds of F1, was meant to return Renault to the top step of Formula 1. But instead, it's left them in absolute tatters. With the 5-year plan and the 100 race plan both, complete failures, Renault have decided they've had enough. They've decided to give up on F1. So, here we are, midway through the 2024 season, and everything that Renault and Alpine have planned is completely dead on the ground. Their engines are made out of stale croissants again, the French driver they said for the past 5 seasons is a potential world champion has been cast off. The only driver they have signed for next season is a Red Bull cast-off. The Alpine dream is dead. It's done. It's finished. This week it was revealed that Renault would be shutting down their engine manufacturing project and buying from Mercedes instead from 2026. On top of that, they'll be buying a number of key parts from the German manufacturer, including the gearbox and the rear suspension. Just as they've done twice before, the Renault F1 team is laying down arms and they're giving up on the F1 dream. And honestly, who can really blame them? Things for Alpine have been going really badly recently, and the amount of investment required to continue doing what they're doing, building their own engines and running this team, just isn't worth it for them anymore. To add insult to injury, BP, who are Renault's fuel and lubricant supplier, have signed an exclusive deal with Audi from 2026, essentially dumping Renault by the wayside. When your sponsors start abandoning you, you know that things have really gone wrong. To be fair to Renault, shutting down their engine facilities probably is the right decision. They haven't made a competitive or even particularly good engine since 2013. The 2014 engine, onwards basically, completely held Red Bull back through the turbo hybrid era, and at the moment it's really holding Alpine back as well. So the news at the moment is that Alpine's going to be using a Mercedes engine, gearbox and rear suspension from 2026 onwards, but Renault have so little faith in their own engine and the Alpine team as a whole that actually if they can get all those parts from 2025 onwards, then apparently that is what they're after. There's a lot of paperwork that's going to need to be done before this can become anything official, which means we're probably not going to hear anything until after the summer break. But what we know for sure is that the Alpine 5-year plan, the 100 race plan, and any other kind of plan they have to ever be a competitive team in Formula 1 is completely done. Being a customer team in Formula 1, especially one that's going to be buying gearboxes and rear suspension, makes it completely impossible to be competitive. Because of the restrictions that buying engines and gearboxes and rear suspension place on your design freedom, you can't ever find a competitive advantage against the people you're buying from. Renault, by buying engines and all these parts off Mercedes, are essentially saying that they're quite happy to never again beat a Mercedes car in an F1 race. Obviously, it's not quite that cut and dry, but that's pretty much what they're giving up. Are they wrong to do so? Well, no, I don't really think so, and it's kind of sad to say that, really. As a manufacturer team, they have completely undelivered to the point of it actually being an embarrassment for the Renault brand and the Alpine brand as well. They've become so desperate to try and find anything to help them improve that they did that whole fire the entire management structure thing, and now they've turned to Flavio Briatore, the man who basically completely destroyed the team so many years ago by using them to cheat and destroying their reputation as well. They've turned to him to try and help them. In fact, this whole closing the engine manufacturer thing is actually completely his idea, but if you get in bed with the devil, then you've got to expect consequences. Like I said though, this whole plan probably isn't actually a bad plan for Renault and Alpine. By buying engines and parts off Mercedes, they're going to be saving themselves tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars a year in what was essentially wasted money. The Alpine F1 team and the Renault Powertrains project has been a money pit of epic proportions for Renault, and all they have to show for it is an engine which everyone knows is appalling, and a team whose 100 race plan has backfired so badly that they have exactly 10% of the points they did at the same point 3 seasons ago. After almost 100 races, they aren't title challengers. They're 90% worse off than they were when they started. By giving up on their engine and buying parts off Mercedes, this really is the end for Renault. So, where do they go from here? They aren't going to be fighting for race wins anytime soon, that's a given at this point. They're actively making decisions which will make them less competitive in the long run, and that is really complete surrender in Formula 1. Of course, we've seen this before. As a team, Renault have already quit F1 twice before when the going gets tough. It's actually something they're very good at this point. Honestly, I'd give it a year before they actually just completely sell the team. You don't bring a man like Flavio Briatore into your team to create a friendly, positive work environment with people who, get up, let's do it, let's win a championship. If you're bringing in one of F1's dodgiest dealers, it's to get deals done. The Andrettis must be absolutely delighted to be hearing the news that Renault are going to be binning off their engine department. Buying a team that makes its own engines already is really difficult. You either have to let them continue making engines, or you have to tell them that they have to sack their entire engine department, and no one's ever really going to feel very good about that. But Alpine have already made that decision. They've already decided to sack their entire engine department. The Renault engine project is completely dead at this point, so Andretti can come in and buy engines off Mercedes, who really aren't going to mind too much if Andretti decide they don't want to buy engines off Mercedes anymore. And considering they're partnered with Cadillac, who at the moment, as far as everyone knows, are still aiming to build an engine for 2028 onwards, Andretti could come in 2026, buy Mercedes engines for 2 years, and then when Cadillac are ready, just, say see you later Mercedes, will have Cadillac engines instead. Flavio Briatore wasn't bought into Alpine to make them competitive again. He was bought in to make them as enticing as possible to potential buyers, and sacking off the entire engine project is the perfect way to do that. Mark my words, Alpine isn't just giving up on making their own engines, they're giving up on F1 altogether, and it's just a matter of time until Renault disappears from F1 yet again.